Okay guys, so in this lecture we are going to explore mental ray rendering using mental ray architectural and design materials. I'm going to show you how to set up the mental ray renderer versus the default 3ds Max renderer, and then how to use some mental ray materials to get some pretty nice looking results without a lot of work. So let's go ahead and start here. I'm going to create a box. I'm going to make it square by holding down the control key at the base, and then I'm going to rise it up. If you'll notice, I'm making it about the same size as the perspective grid there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into what's called a cyclorama, or a CYC. That's CYC, short for Cyclorama, SICK pronounced. Sounds like S-I-C-K, SICK. Basically it's just a photo backdrop for high quality studio lighting. So I'm going to convert this box to, or before I do that I actually want to subdivide it a little bit. So I'm going to give it a few more segments. I'm going to hit F4 to show my edged faces. And I'm going to do 4 segments, I think, in each dimension ought to do it. Alright, and then I'm going to right click to convert it to an editable poly. And then I'm going to go into polygon mode, and I'm going to go into my left orthographic viewport, and I'm going to just marquee drag to select all the polygons. If you'll notice here, selecting kind of the 4 of the sides, and then I'm going to go ahead and delete, and that just leaves me with kind of like a right angle here. And this is my SICK, and so what I'm going to do to finish it off is I'm going to add a turbo smooth modifier. So I'm going to go to the modifier tab, I hit the T key to go to the T's, and I'm going to add a turbo smooth. If you'll notice, I get that nice little transition there in the corner, just like you'll see if you go to pretty much any professional photographer studio. And then I'm going to increase the iterations on the turbo smooth to 3 to get that nice little smooth transition there. Now that I have that, I'm going to hit the J key to hide that bounding box. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a teapot, and I'm using my teapot because I want to have something basically to look at when I start rendering stuff. And then I want to up the resolution on the teapot, so I'm going to select the teapot and go into the modifier tab, and I'm going to increase the number of segments to something much higher, like say 16. I'll probably do a decent job here. Okay, so I got my teapot framed up, I got my SICK made, and I'm just going to go ahead and render this so we can discuss a few properties here with regard to object material properties and lighting. So we render stuff in 3ds Max by clicking on this little button right here, teapot, and if you'll notice, it drops down a little menu. It says render production, so I'm going to hit that, and it's going to render out my teapot. But if you'll notice, we can't really see my background object, and so this would probably be a good time for me to explain what's going on here. What is basically happening is the object is there, so my backdrop is there, but what's happening is the surface normals are actually facing the opposite direction that the camera is facing. So I can demonstrate that by, first I'm going to collapse the stack, or bake all my modifiers down to an editable mesh here. And when my object's an editable mesh, it allows me to show the surface normals by selecting polygon faces, and if I click on show normals, we can see here that if I zoom out on these polygons that are selected, we're going to see these blue lines on the other side, and those blue lines are what is called a surface normal. And a surface normal is basically just a line or a vector that is tangent to a polygon surface. So in each case, each one of these polygons has a normal attached to it, and that normal orients perpendicular to that polygon, which basically tells the renderer, when I go ahead and render this, kind of how those polygons are sloping or slanting, and that's how the software knows to render this transition here. So we get that nice fold there where it actually looks like it's shading it. So at the extreme it's kind of dark, and then it gets darker, darker, less dark, less dark. And that's how the software knows to render that to make that look like it's actually curved, like so. Alright, so that's a surface normal. If I want to reverse those guys, what I need to do is add a modifier. So I'm going to select my object here and get back out to object mode. I'm going to select my object, and I'm going to go into the modifier tab, and I'm going to hit N for normal, and I'm going to select a normal modifier. And that normal modifier kind of just does two things. It unifies the normals or flips the normals. So unify is if all of these normals were facing in kind of opposite directions. What it would do, it would make them all follow the same direction. But since these normals were already unified, all I had to do was flip them. And then I can tell that they've actually been flipped, because this time when I come back over here to the other side and I hit render, there we go. Now we can see my backdrop and everything's copacetic again. Okay, so I'm going to hit the Z key, select my teapot, and I'm going to render. And I just want to talk a little bit about the properties of this image. Okay, so what we have here is we have a couple of polygonal objects inside of 3ds Max. We have my sick, and then we have my teapot. And these objects currently just have solid materials on them. And so a material is just very basically just a color, okay? And so at the base level, this is a material in its simplest form. We have the object's diffuse color, all right? So that's this red color here. That's the diffuse color. We have the object's ambient color, which is the shaded area where it's kind of falling off there and it's getting kind of dark. That's referred to as the ambient color. And then we have the highlight. And so the highlight is just basically where the light's rays are being reflected directly back into the camera. And so this hot spot here on the teapot and here, those are the highlights. There's a highlight there. Okay, so we have the diffuse color is basically the absence of a highlight and the absence of the ambient color. Okay, so there's the ambient color. Ambient is basically the dark shaded area on the object. Okay, so this doesn't, I mean, although this looks cool, if you were new to 3D you probably think this looked pretty great, but in reality this is just not very good. This is the 3ds Max default renderer, and it's not really that great. So I want to show you how to make it great. So what we're going to first do is we are going to change the renderer. And so a renderer is basically just a program that plugs into a 3D piece of software such as 3ds Max, and it basically takes this 3D view that I'm tumbling around here, and it kind of bakes it down to a rasterized or a 2D image that's compatible with output to video or image manipulation software like Adobe Photoshop or what have you. Okay, so a renderer basically just takes this three-dimensional environment and it allows you to assign materials and textures and all sorts of other advanced lighting and physical properties to your scene, and then render them out and get a nice pretty image. Alright, so by default Max comes with I think it's just called the 3ds Max scanline renderer, and we access the render settings by clicking on right here, this little guy, the teapot with the little, I don't know what that is, like a dialogue there, and that's going to open up the render settings. You can also access the render settings by going to rendering, and where is it? I think it's F10. There we go. Render setup. So if you hit the F10 key or you go into here, rendering, render settings, and it'll open right up. So this time I'm going to hit the F10 key. Okay, that was pretty funny. So apparently I'm recording this lecture with Camtasia screen recorder, and the keyboard shortcut in Macs for the render setup is F10, but the keyboard shortcut for Camtasia to quit recording is actually also F10. So, whoops, learn that lesson. Won't do that again. Okay, so if you're not running Camtasia though, you can hit F10 and you will open up the render setup. From now on, I'm going to just launch it from going here in the render setup icon in the GUI. Okay, so we're going to come into the render setup, and what I want to do is change the renderer from the default Max scanline renderer to Mental Ray, which is a much higher quality professional grade renderer that is actually used in film and television. So that's the one we want to use for visualization. This is the way to go, trust me. Alright, so we're in the render setup, and we're going to go into the Common tab here, and I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and right there we have a little tab that says Assign Renderer. So I'm going to click on that tab, and we can see here it says Production. I don't know why that doesn't say something like Renderer, but it says Production. That basically means the renderer. So it says Current Production Renderer is the default scanline renderer. Okay, so I want to change that, so I'm going to click on this little Choose Renderer button here to the right of that, and it's going to open up this little dialog. It allows me to pick from a variety of different renderers. In this case, I want to select NVIDIA Mental Ray. So I'm going to say NVIDIA Mental Ray, and I'm going to say OK to assign the renderer, and you can see the render dialog kind of changes. Alright, that's the first thing that's different. And now we have this kind of little station down here below where it allows us to change kind of interactively the quality settings for our renderer. Alright, I'm going to click on render, and not a whole lot of difference, maybe a little bit better, but nothing yet because we haven't really assigned any lighting or materials yet. So let's go ahead and start tweaking things a little bit. Before I do that though, let's talk about this render view here a little bit and what you can do inside of there to kind of help you with your workflow. Alright, so the first thing we have here is area to render, and we have view. Okay, that means basically that it's just going to render the active view. So I have no other active view available other than the perspective. But watch what happens if I make the front view the active view. See how it's lit up in gold like that? And I click render. It's going to render the front orthographic viewport. Alright, so you need to know that whatever view is active is the view that is going to get rendered. So what I usually do, just to make sure that I'm rendering what I want, is I just maximize my view, and then it can only render one view because that's the only one active. Alright, we got another thing here under area to render. We can do selective, and what that'll do is basically if you select an object in your scene and you click on render, it's going to only render that object. So if I select the backdrop, only renders that object. It's kind of nice if you just want to see the changes on one object and not the other. We also have a region selection, and that's this little guy. So if you just want to see the change in just a small portion of the render, you can just render that region, and it's only going to render a small portion of the frame, depending on what you basically drag this thing around. So I could re-render this entire frame by just taking the region all over and clicking render, but I won't bore you with that. Okay, that's the region. Crop, I'm not actually sure what that one does. Okay, that's actually going to take the render region and it's going to crop a value based upon the region. That one I am not so impressed with. And then blow up, I assume, is going to do the opposite. It's going to blow it up. In my opinion, those two last two, crop and blow up, are of marginal use. I would either do view or region. Another cool thing is this one here, which is kind of a little toggle button. And if you just mouse over these and hold long enough, this is very useful. It tells you what it does. So this one says speeds up by rendering only the selected object. Okay, so it differs from this one selected in that it will render the entire scene but only update the object you have selected. So you can see here it's rendering the entire scene this time instead of just the selected object, but it's only updating the selected object. Alright, so if I turn that off and render the whole scene, there we go. And then if I turn it back on and select only the backdrop and hit render again, it's only going to update the backdrop and leave the teapot alone. Okay, so that's kind of useful. I'm going to turn that back off. Viewport. This will basically allow you to select the viewport. So if I had a 4 view here, I could go in here and say render my quad 4 top, and it would render the top view. Render my perspective, and it would render the perspective. So it's just another way for you to select your rendered viewport. Render preset, we'll get into those a little bit later, not just yet. You can also open the render setup box by just clicking on this button right here, and then environment and effects tab, which we'll get into here in a little bit also. I'll show you what that does shortly. You can save any of your images that you render out of here by clicking on the save image button, and this allows you to navigate to a scene, or navigate to a folder, and you can save your image as kind of whatever you want, to JPEG. They have all the various formats that Max lets you write. It's kind of nice. We have copy image, and what that's going to do if I click that is it's basically just going to copy this image to RAM or the buffer. And so if I open up Photoshop, I would actually be able to hit Control V for paste, and it would actually paste that image into a new document. This one is kind of nice. This is called Clone Rendered Frame. These little two guys that look like they're kind of dancing next to each other. And what it's going to do is it's just going to take this image and it's going to make a copy of it and put it in a floater. So this is useful if I ever wanted to, say, compare two different renders to each other, which you'll see is going to be useful as we go on. So once again, if I wanted to clone that image, I could kind of make a temporary copy of it. If you want to keep your cloned images, though, you're going to have to click on save and then save that out, or else it's not going to save. The moment you close the program, these two images will be gone. Alright, so I'm going to close those guys. We have print image, which would just take this image and print it to a printer. And then we have clear, which is just going to erase the buffer. Alright. These buttons over here are going to isolate the different color channels. So if you just want to see the blue channel, you can do that. If you want to see all three. If you want to see the alpha channel, you can click on this. It's completely white because there is no transparency in this image. So, and then I'm going to go back to color. And then we have monochrome, which is just going to show your image in black and white. Alrighty. And then this just tells us what kind of bit depth we have in our image. In this case, it's RGB plus alpha. And then we have toggle UI overlays. That's this guy right down here. So if I don't want to see those settings, or I'm sorry, no, I got that wrong. The UI overlays, I'm actually not sure. We'll just keep going. I think that's if you have a title frame and a save frame, but we don't have that. So there's the one that I was looking for, toggle UI, and if you click on this guy, it'll hide those settings, but I don't see any reason to hide those because these things are very useful for changing the quality and tweaking your settings. Okay, so that's kind of how the render view works, overview. Now let's start having some fun. Let's make this thing look a lot nicer than it currently looks. And first thing we're going to have to do on that note is I'm going to go back to my 4 view here. I'm going to minimize this one for a second, and then I'm going to come in here to my left orthographic viewport, and I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to go to this one at the very far right down here called Systems. I'm going to click on that. And what I'm looking for is I want to create an object type daylight. Okay, so daylight is basically kind of a highly advanced physics-based lighting setup where it kind of emulates the sun and all its physical properties. So it kind of gives you really good lighting for just the click of a button. So I like to use this one quite a bit because it just really doesn't involve that much setup time and it looks really good. So it says here, you are creating, alright, I'll show you how I did that again. I went to Create, very far right, Systems, and then I want to create a daylight. So I'm going to go in here to my left ortho and I'm going to click. And what's going to happen is it's going to create a daylight system. And the first click just kind of drops the pivot or the target. And then the second click allows me to place this light in space. So I'm going to click again. I've just created my daylight system. If you'll notice, I'm still in daylight mode because it's lit up in light blue. So if I want to get out of daylight creation mode, I'm going to right click in the interface, and now I'm done. I'm out of daylight creation mode. If I were to click in there again, I just keep creating daylight systems. So you want to watch that to just make one. Okay. So I made my daylight system here, and then I want to select it and go into the Modifier tab because I want to change its parameters. So the first thing I want to do under all these parameters, there's quite a few, is I want to change its position. So right here under the modifier stack, I want to change the position from date, time, and location to manual. Okay, and what that's going to do is I'm going to hit the W key so I can show you. That is going to allow me to move this light in space. If I were to leave this at date, time, and location, if you'll notice, I'm trying to move it and I'm not going to let me do it. It's locked. And that's because its position is based on actual physical time of day, and it's going to move the sun to where the sun would be at that time of day. Although that's useful for us, we just want to do this manually, so I'm going to click on manual. And now I can move this light into position however I want. And in my case, I'm just going to kind of orient it. I'm going to put its pivot point kind of right there on the teapot, but I want to move it kind of down to be about, I don't know, 45 degrees with respect to the ground. And then I'm going to change its shadow. If you'll notice over here, if I change the sun's orientation, I'll kind of cast the shadow out here to the left, and I kind of like that look, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it. Alright, so now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to render this again, and we're going to see a little bit better result, I think, this time. So I'm going to select my active viewport, which is my perspective view, and I'm going to say render, and check it out. We get a render, but it's a little bit hot, but definitely will look a lot nicer than what we had before. So I want to change kind of the exposure values of this lighting system. And so I'm going to hit the 8 key to bring up the environment effects controls. And let's see here. It's not giving me what I'm looking for. Okay. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what happened, but I must have hit something inadvertently, and I kind of screwed up my my sunlight, and it was all blown out and not connected properly. So what I did was I just deleted it and I made a new one, and so now I'm back in business. Okay, so I got my sunlight set up. I have changed its position to manual. I've kind of placed it so that it's looking at my teapot and it's casting a shadow over here to the left here. If I render it out, this is what it was supposed to look like before. So it should look kind of a little bit better than the default renderer. You can start to see here subtleties where we kind of have a darker shadow and the shadow gets a little bit lighter. off into the distance, and the teapot's looking a little bit more natural. We still have, however, the ambient color, so that's the shaded part of the teapot. We have the diffuse color, which is kind of the red color, and then we have the highlight, which is the lightened highlight, where basically the light's rays are being reflected directly back into the camera. Alright, so this looks pretty good. This is a little bit of an improvement, but let's say we want to make this look a little bit better. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do with our daylight setup is we're going to go into the Modifier tab, and under the sunlight setting we're going to change it from standard to MR sun, and watch what happens. So we get a little bit of a change here in our perspective viewport. And so something also very nice in 3ds Max is the fact that they allow you to turn on the realistic shading right here by just clicking on the interface where it says realistic plus edge faces. I'm going to turn off the edge faces, and what we're going to kind of get here is a real-time preview of our lighting, shadows and everything. So this is very useful for doing things like placing your shadows where you want them to look. If I wanted to have this shadow cast behind my object, I could do that here, and get a really nice interactive preview of how that lighting is going to look. And you do that by clicking on, first you want realistic, and then number 2 I'm going to come down here to the tab where it says lighting and shadows, and I want to turn on illuminate with scene lights. And what that's going to do is it's going to use the lights in my scene, in this case it's my daylight system, and it's going to kind of give me a real-time feedback of what that's going to look like. So I'm going to maximize my viewport here, and I'm going to select my light. If ever you want to select your lights and you don't want to minimize your viewport and go hunt for it, what you can do is come over here into the select by name tab and open up the select by name. I'm going to go ahead and select none to turn everything off, and then I'm going to turn on select lights only, or display lights only. And so the daylight system isn't showing up in there, so I believe it's going to be called something else. So it's probably going to be a helper. No, let's see what it's called here. Display object types. I'm just going to turn them all on until it shows up. So these are your icons for your objects to hide or unhide, and there it is. I believe it's display groups, and I don't know why it's considered a group, but it's probably because it's a third-party piece of software, this daylight system, and they have to classify it as a group inside of Max for some reason. Alright, so if I want to select my object or my light, it's the daylight system. It's going to show up under the filters here as a group. If I double click that and say OK, now it's selected my light without me having to go out into the scene to hunt for it. Alright, so then I'm going to come into the Modifier tab, and we've changed it to, first of all, from sunlight type to mental ray sun, and we got a little bit better display here. And now under skylight, what I want to do is I want to change it to MR sky. Okay, and we're going to get a whole nother, you can see how everything kind of lightened up a little bit. If I render this out again, you're going to see that we're going to get a little bit better. Everything's kind of just getting a little bit more high quality. Okay, so what we've done there with the MR sky is we've actually added a light dome. And so the light dome, if I turn this to the side here, I can kind of render it and show you that we now have a kind of like a physical environment that emulates the actual dome of the sky, and what that is good for is to reflect in your objects in your scene. So materials have a lot of reflection. Typically anything in the real world reflects to some degree, And so it really helps for us if we put something in the scene that is going to reflect into our materials. And I'll show you a little bit more about that as we keep going. So I'm going to select my teapot here, and I'm going to zoom in. And now we can go ahead and render this again, and we're going to get a little bit better result. It's going to take a little longer as well. It's getting a little softer. My shadows, you can see it added a little bit of blue. And that's because the sky dome is kind of reflecting in everything and brightening everything up. Alright, the next thing that we want to do is we want to change the material in our scene. So by default, we're kind of using these max materials, which are really not that great, and they don't talk that well to mental ray either. So what I want to do is introduce you to the materials editor. So we're going to come over here, up here in the GUI, and right there, that guy, the materials editor, I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And it's going to open up this kind of daunting box here. It's really not that complicated. It's just the place inside of Max where you kind of organize all your materials and textures and apply them to objects in your scene. So what we have over here to the left is the material map browser, and this is kind of where you either save or load all your materials in your scene from. We have the view here, view 1, and this is basically where you edit or manipulate your materials in your scene and make connections and whatnot. And then we have the material parameter editor, and this is where you actually edit all the different parameters on your individual materials. Alright, so I'm going to show you how this works really fast. We're going to create a mental ray material. Okay, so if you'll notice here, we have regular old materials. Those are this is pretty much any material that's available to you in 3ds Max. We have standard materials. If I expand that, standard materials are basically 3ds Max's materials. Okay, so those materials are going to work with pretty much anything, including mental ray, but they're not exactly optimized or designed for mental ray renderer. So we're going to stay away from those because mental ray is going to talk the best to mental ray. And there's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of materials for you guys in your projects that I want you to become familiar with, and that is the Arc and Design material, mental ray, Arc and Design material. It's kind of like the jack of all trades. So I'm going to double click to make one of these guys. That's how you make one. So I'm going to double click, and you'll notice it's going to create a material number 25 Arc and Design material. And if I double click this material, it's going to open up the material in the material editor, parameters editor. And then we have a navigator, and the navigator shows us kind of like this, how we can navigate this scene where we can actually have tons of these different materials in the same scene. So if I want to make another one, I can just double click, and there we go. Now I got 2 materials in the same scene. And I just wanted to show you that you can do that. If you want to see the preview of this material, you can double click on the icon there. It'll make that a little bit larger, so you can kind of see what a thumbnail of what the material is going to look like. You can also double click to open up the material in the material parameter editor here, and you can change the name. So for example, if I wanted to call this one plasticky, and I would hit enter, if you'll notice it changed its name to plasticky, and then the other one is material 26. So notice something really fast here. If I want to edit a material in the materials parameters editor here, I have to double click on it to get it to come up. If I just single click, if you'll notice, I'm still on plasticky. Even though I have material 26 selected, material 26 is not the active material in my parameters editor until I double click it. Alright, so just be aware of that. If you want to edit the parameters in here, you need to double click the material. If you just single click it, it's not going to open it up in here. So double click, there we go. I'm back to plasticky. I'm going to delete that one because I don't need it. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the objects in my scene. So I have my, I I guess I need to show you that. So I'm going to select the objects in my scene. I'm going to select my backdrop and my teapot. And then I'm going to open up my material editor. I have plasticky selected. And I'm going to right click on it and say assign material to selection. Okay. And what that's going to do is it's going to put that material to my scene. And now when I render my scene, I'm going to get a much different result because now I have mental ray lighting and a mental ray arc and design material assigned. And so when I render this, it's going to look a lot prettier. Alright? So now we have our teapot in kind of all of its glory. This arc and design default material has some of the same parameters that I spoke about previously. We have a ambient color, so that's kind of the shaded color here to the side. We have a diffuse color, which is kind of this gray. And then we have a highlight, so there's my highlight. The highlight on this one is a lot smaller. And this is kind of more like a very shiny plastic or porcelain. But we have another attribute that's kind of shown itself to us, and that is a reflection. So materials can also hold reflections. So in addition to ambient, diffuse, specular, we also can see reflected, things reflected in each other. Alright, so now you can also see here very faintly kind of our environment dome being reflected into that material. So this is kind of cool. Alright, so the next thing I want to show you when it comes to the architectural and design materials is that you can change them very easily, and they have a lot of presets available to you, and those are available over here in the materials editor right here under the templates. So I have the plastic key selected, and I'm going to go in here to the templates, and if I pull that down, we can see here we have all sorts of different available parameters. And the cool thing about mental rays, they kind of give you a little description of what each one of these does. So if I just hover over here, appearance and attributes, it says use this section to define generic appearance for your materials without affecting the existing. Scroll down here, the existing colors or maps. Alright, so if I wanted to change this material to a matte finish, I could do that. And notice it changed my icon. I don't have to put this to the scene because everything in my scene already has this material assigned. And then I go and re-render, and now we have kind of a clay matte finish looking object. Alright, so if I change this preset again, so I'm going to go in here to the templates, pull down. I believe the first one that we did was the Pro Finish. Oh no, first one was the glossy finish, which we already saw. I think, yep, that's the default one. So I'll go back to the glossy finish. This is kind of, again, for like plastic or porcelain, something that's both highly reflective and has a very focused specularity. And then we can go to pearl finish. See here, creating a soft blurry reflection without affecting the colors or maps. I'm going to click render, and pearl is kind of like pearly white. The highlight is very dissipated, and then finally we have a matte finish, which is going to be kind of like straight up clay. So between these three kind of gets you started, a really good starting point for whatever surface it is you're trying to create. So let's talk about tweaking some of these settings manually without using the templates. We also have down here, which I want to get into a little bit later, we have transparent materials like glass, solid glass, metals, chrome, brush metal, copper, pattern copper, advanced. We'll get into some of this other stuff later, but for now I just want to talk about the material properties. So I'm going to change this guy back to a glossy finish, and I'm going to render that out. And so what you can do is you can start with these materials with just the baseline settings that Mental Ray gives you, and then you can tweak the levels. So if I wanted to, say, change the color of this object or this material, what I would do is I'd come over here into the material parameters, and I would want to change the diffuse color, because remember, this is the diffuse color, this is the ambient color, and this is the specular color. So I'm going to come over here into the diffuse. I'm going to change the color. So if I wanted to make this teapot kind of a seafoamy green, I'll go a little bit more green here, and then I was going to go ahead and render it here. We'll get a nice seafoamy color, and because I have the background selected also and assigned with this material, it's going to change that as well. So I'm going to rename this guy now to kind of seafoam I'm going to call this seafoam porcelain. And then I'm going to create a new architectural and design material. So I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And this one I'm going to call, double click, and I'm going to change its name from Material 27 to Sick Color, so that I know that that's the color I have assigned to my Sick. Alright, so I'm going to select my Sick over here in the view, and then I'm going to right click on this guy and say Assign Material to Selection. And now I have basically my teapot is going to be the seafoam porcelain, and the background is going to be my Sick color. They're both basically derived from the exact same material. One, I just changed the diffuse color, and that's it. So the teapot, I just changed the diffuse color, and if I want to edit that one again, I'm going to double click it. Alright, roughness value and the diffuse level. Let's talk about some of these guys over here. So cool thing about the Arc and Design material is that if you just hover your cursor over whatever parameter it is, the software will pull up a little help hints kind of and tell you what that slider does. So if I go over diffuse, it's going to say the maximum amount of diffuse reflection. So basically this is going to increase or decrease the amount of diffuse color of the object. Alright, we have a roughness, and the roughness value is basically the microscopic roughness of the surface. That's just so if you want something to look a little rougher, for example like a clay, you would actually increase that roughness value up to something like 1. We have reflectivity. So reflectivity is just how much the surface is going to reflect the other objects in the scene. So currently the reflectivity on this one is fairly high. So if I wanted to change the reflectivity on my seafoam porcelain to something a little lower, like a 0.5, I could do that. And if I re-render, and this would be a great time for me to re-render using the region. So I'm going to go to region here, and what the region allows you to do is you just kind of take like a cross section of a piece of the frame, and so you can kind of side by side see the difference in the results. So I just reduced the reflectivity, so I'm going to say render, and we can see here, it's maybe not so obvious, but if you move the box out of the way, you can see that hard line where we basically are getting a much different color because the sky is being reflected at a different value. And if I change this a little bit more, so let's make it 0.25, and I'll render. Now if I move this out of the way, we'll get a much harder line there, and that's just because I've changed that one parameter, which is the reflectivity. So that material is no longer reflecting the sky so much, and therefore it's changed the color considerably. Alright. We also have glossiness, and glossiness is basically what affects the, I believe it's the highlight. So the glossiness value affects the highlight. Alright, so the higher the value, the glossier or the more focused that highlight is going to be. So I can demonstrate this by taking the glossiness value down to something much lower. It takes a while to update here. It takes a second. I'm going to take this down to something like a 0.25, and There we go. You can see how the highlight went from this very sharp point here to kind of being dispersed over the entire surface. And so if I go ahead and re-render that view, we're going to get a much different look on that object than previously. So basically what I want you guys to do is look at the surface or the material for whatever it is you're trying to use. So if it was like, say, a fabric or a cotton, then you probably wouldn't have a very high glossiness value on the material. You probably wouldn't have much of a reflectivity value either, because fabric, although it reflects some, it reflects very little, as opposed to things like plastic, leather, granite countertop, metal, glass, all have very high reflectivity and also very high glossiness. All right, the glossiness samples is just basically going to affect how grainy or how clean the highlight is going to be. All right, so high is going to be a smoother highlight, and low is going to be a much grainier highlight. So you may not want to play with that one too much. Again, you can also change the reflected color by playing with this value here, although until you're experienced with that, I don't recommend doing that. Let's see what else we have. We have refraction. Alright, so refraction is basically light bending through another object. Alright, so in the case of glass, glass has refractivity, meaning that it's going to bend the light and make it look distorted as the light passes through the object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new Arc and Design material, and this one I'm going to call glass, and then I'm going to use one of the templates that they have available to us here. So I'm going to go into transparent materials, and I'm going to assign glass thin geometry. Alright, so I'm going to click on that one, and then I'm going to select my teapot over here in my viewport, and I'm going to right click and say assign material to selection, and then I'm going to go ahead and render that teapot out again, but this time with a glass material. And so if you'll notice here that I have a glass material on this teapot, but it looks a little weird. It kind of just looks like it's a little ghosted, and the light, it doesn't really look that great. It really doesn't look like glass, and I want to point out what that is, why that is. Alright, so what's happening here is I selected glass thin geometry, and what happens is when you select thin geometry, what they do is over here in the special effects tab, it's basically going to disable the refractive parameters for the material. So if I go over here into special effects, and I'm looking for advanced rendering options, I think, and I'm looking for right here advanced transparency options, thin walled, so can use single faces. Alright, so if this is turned on, it's basically going to override the refractive index of my object. So I'm going to turn that back on to solid, and then I'm going to show you the outcome here. By turning that back on, now this IOR value right here, which is the index of refraction, is actually going to be used. So that, if you'll notice, that's all I did. I didn't do anything other than go down there and toggle off the use thin walled material, and then I'm going to re-render this guy. And now the light is actually bending and being distorted inside of the glass, and it's actually making it look a lot more convincing, like a picture that would actually be made out of glass. See how it's kind of bending? You can see the light rays bending. The other thing that you want to do is, if you are going to make something that's glass, what I strongly recommend is that you make it double-sided. And I'll show you the results of this. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and clone this guy, so I'm going to hold down the shift key to make a copy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to render one teapot that is normal single-sided geometry, and then I'm going to select this other teapot and I'm going to add a shell modifier to it. Okay, and the shell modifier, as you guys remember, just kind of basically creates another side to the object. And I'm going to change that from outer amount to 0, and I want to do an inner amount of, say, like a 0.1. I just want to give that glass just a little bit of thickness, maybe like a 0.25. And it's starting to kind of mess with the spout a little bit there, so I'm going to do a 0.1. Seemed to work pretty well. Okay, now I got one of these teapots that is single-sided and the other one that's kind of got a thickness to it. And I just want you to see the subtle difference in the two teapots. And you can see how this one's a little bit darker than the other one, but also just look at the interior components here where the object is kind of self-intersecting, and we get a much more convincing kind of intersection of those areas along with the refractions. And you can see how on this one you can see the other side of the base, whereas this one you just can't quite see through that, as well as the shadow here is a little bit more convincing. So my encouragement to you guys is if you're going to do anything that's glass, you want to use that shell modifier to give it a thickness, and it's going to give it a lot more convincing look. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we can do, but for the most part, this is kind of the basics of materials. There's a whole bunch of other presets here. I'm going to just play with a couple more. So I'm going to come ahead and zoom out here, and I think I'm going to make my backdrop a little bit bigger. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this teapot here again, say OK. I duplicated the one that didn't have the thickness. This one I'm going to leave as a glass object. And then this one I'm going to just assign another material to. So I'm going to come over here into material editor. So I want to put a seafoam material on that middle one. So I'm going to say, where is it? And it's not giving me this assign existing or assign material. Okay, so I just had to click it a couple times to get this to pop up. So I'm going to say assign material to selection, and then I'm going to assign I'm going to make a new one. So I'm going to go Arc and Design here and make another material. And zoom out a little bit in my browser. And then this one I'm going to call metal. And I'm going to come over here into my presets, and I'm going to grab a metal, and I'm going to go ahead and do a chrome. Okay. And so there's my chrome material. And maybe I'll just call it chrome to be consistent. And then I'm going to assign this to my existing selection. And then now I'm going to go ahead and render these guys out. And so one thing it looks like I accidentally did, and that's funny, I accidentally double click my my sick backdrop color instead of the new material, so you can see it's kind of easy to lose your way in this thing. So I'm going to double click this one, and I'm going to call this one the sick material. And then I'm going to assign it to the sick. There we go. And so what I have here is I have a chrome assigned to my teapot on the left. I've got kind of a pearly seafoam color that I assign to the one in the middle, and then finally have my class material on the one on the right. And so what you want to do for your assignment is you're going to want to basically think about all the different types of materials that you have in your scene, and you're going to want to start creating materials that basically look like that surface property for your type of object. So materials do not have any color to them other than just a solid color. So things like, say, a fabric color like a herringbone pattern or floral print, you're going to have to do with texture mapping, and texture mapping we're going to get into in the coming lectures here. For now, I just want you to go in and assign a simple material to everything and try to get it to look like the object as best as you can, just using the material. Okay. So one thing you can do now that I've made a bunch of different materials is you can actually save your materials. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. So I've made 4 different materials here. I've made a silk material, a seafoam porcelain material, I have made a chrome material, and I've made a glass material. Let's say that I want to save all these materials so that I can reuse them, right? So I want to be able to use them the next time I open Max or in my next project. And the way we're going to do that, first of all, is we're going to go into Max and we need to set up a project directory. So I'm going to come over here to the project folder, and I'm going to click on the little icon here, and I want to set up a new project folder on my desktop. So I'm going to say make new folder, and I'm going to call this DM2 for digital modeling 2 project, and I'm going to call it project 1. Alright, and then I'm going to select that folder and I'm going to say OK. And what has happened here, I'll just show you, is that Max has created a interior design or a DM2 project folder, which I just made, and then inside of there Max has created a list of default directories, and these are basically the directories where you're going to store all your information for this project, and this will work for very detailed projects. So we have scenes, we have material libraries, we have where else? Let's see, material libraries, and then there should be one called materials, but there's, or I'm sorry, textures, but there is not. We will make one of those on our own, and we're going to store all of our stuff in here. So all of our scene related files are going to go into this project folder, and what this is going to allow you to do is copy this entire directory, the DM2 project 1, and it's going to retain all your stuff, all your settings, all your materials, all your textures, all your scenes, everything. Alright, so now that that's done, what we can do here is we can go into the material editor. So I'm going to open up the material editor, and right over here under the material map browser, if I click on this little arrow, it's kind of tricky, over here to the left, this little black arrow, material map browser options, and if I say click on that left click, and I'm going to say new material library, okay, and then it's going to open up this little box, and it's basically going to say create new material library, and then down here it's new library.mat. So .mat is just the file format for material library. I'm going to call this DM2 project _01 mat, and I'm going to say save, and check it out. It's going to create here a DM2 project 01.mat lib for library. And if I want to save all these materials that I just made today, all I have to do is right click, so select this material library here that currently has nothing in it, and right click, and I can say get all scene materials or maps. So what it's going to do is it's going to take everything that's in my scene and it's going to assign that to this material library. So if I do that, it's going to say get materials from, I'm going to say scene, You can also do render or environment. I'm just going to say scene and check it out. There it goes. It's got all my materials that I just made. Sick materials, seafoam porcelain, glass, chrome. If I want to delete those, I can just say remove from tab. Just right click, remove from tab. I can select, see, I'm going to remove from library, or you can select all your materials just by marquee dragging around them over here in the viewer, material viewer, and then come over here and right click, and you can say get selected materials / maps, and boom, should do it. There it is. Expand it, and it got them all. Alright, so one of those two ways. You can either right click and say get all from scene, or you can just select the ones you want and say get selected materials / maps. Alright, and that's it. You can basically experiment away. I strongly recommend experimenting and creating materials in a viewport such like this, so that you can kind of see all interactively and very quickly all the surface properties. Then go ahead and save them in a material library, and then later you can use that material library in a larger scene to kind of get the result that you're looking for. Alright, so that's it for materials. In the next lecture we're going to cover photometric lights and materials together in the same scene to kind of do like an indoor-outdoor lighting setup. Alright, so good luck, and I'll see you guys in the next video.